Namaste, everybody. Welcome to the introductory lecture on what is Vedanta. So, in this brief lecture, I will present an overview of what is Vedanta and how I am going to approach it in other lectures. So, before that, we'll start off with some terminology. So, obviously, the term Vedanta comes from the term Vedas. And the Vedas can be, in general, split into sort of two sections. One is what is called the ritualistic section, called the Karma Kanda, or the philosophical section called the Jnana Kanda. Vedanta is the end of the Vedas and associated with the Jnana Kanda, where the logical conclusions are presented. So when I say it's the end of the Vedas, it's the logical end, not where it appears, because many of the mantras could appear in the middle of the actual composition. So that is why it's called Vedanta, the end of the Vedas. Upanishads is just another term for Vedanta. It's again about the teachings of the philosophy or the Jnana Kanda that is present in the Vedas. The teaching style in the Upanishads is basically where the style is questions posed by the teachers and answers used for self-reflection. So the idea is that the student was expected to be a self-motivated learner. So the questions were posed, the students thought about it, proposed some answers, the teachers may have responded, but very rarely they give away answers directly. They typically pose more questions and so on. Of course, some of the Upanishads, as we shall see, are very terse. They don't necessarily follow this, but that is the style of teaching that is expected. So, as I was saying earlier, some of these Upanishads are quite large, like the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad or the Chandogya Upanishad. Some are very terse. Mandukya Upanishad, for example, has only 12 verses, so obviously it doesn't have the uh, pedagogical structure of question and answers. And for those Upanishads, we have to rely on the commentaries. And it is these commentaries that give you different interpretations. So when we talk about Vedanta, there could be other there are multiple interpretations, including Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, Advaita, and many, many others uh, that are all interpretations of the same Upanishads. At this point, I'll declare that I have a personal bias towards Advaita, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Vishishtadvaita, Advaita are incorrect or whatever. It only means that they have a different interpretation, and I have not understood those things as deeply as I have tried to understand Advaita. So you may have heard the term Mahavakyas, which are summary statements in the various Upanishads, and ultimately this is what we want to understand. And understand, I mean, semantically, very, very precisely, and they need a lot of unpacking. It is not obvious that these things are easy to understand. So, for example, the phrase or the statement Tattvamasi in the Chandogya Upanishad says, Thou art that, or that thou art. So, what is that and what is thou needs to be unpacked and explained clearly. Otherwise, it's a very, very nebulous statement. Similarly, the other term, Aham Brahmasmi from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, I am Brahman. What does I actually mean? And who or what is this Brahman? So, unless that becomes clear, we cannot actually assign some normal semantics to these Mahavakyas. So, the Mahavakyas are summary statements. Note that they are not commentaries. So, we need to use the commentaries to unpack these statements, unpack every word, and then see what it actually says. Similarly, there are statements like attributed to Adi Shankaracharya, which is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, which, as I said, also needs unpacking, and it loosely translated says Brahman is true. And again, as I said, we have to understand what is this Brahman, and the universe is false. Again, what do you mean by false? I mean, I can see it and I interact with it every day. So what do you mean by falsity? So note that the semantics of this is not to be viewed in terms of logical truth or falsity, in the sense that, hey, this world doesn't exist, or things like that. No, it does exist. But what does it mean to be false when compared to Brahman, which is supposed to be true? And again, over many lectures, we will sort of try to understand what is truth, what is falsity, what is Brahman, etc. So note that the Upanishads, the Jnana Kanda, represents a logical sequence in the thought process of the ancient rishis. So, for example, if you look at most of the Vedic rituals, they are for the gods like Indra, Varuna, Agni, and so on. So, but then they ask, okay, we are doing all these yajnas, but are there gods beyond them? That means that are there somebody who is more powerful than these Vedic gods? Then they also were thinking, do we need to conduct these yajnas to keep these gods happy? I mean, why do we need to please the gods? Shouldn't God by nature should be pleased? Yes, we do yajnas for our satisfaction, but to please the gods seems a very, very strange reason. Then they said, okay, how did these gods come about? I mean, there are so many gods. I mean, how, were they created by other gods? I mean, did they create each other? So they were asking these very, very fundamental questions on effectively what is the nature of God and how do you define God? And that led them to asking other questions, such as, is there a notion of an ultimate being? Is there existence beyond death? Because if you look at the Vedic rituals, it actually says we want to avoid death. All right. But of course, everybody realized that death is inevitable. So then the question is, okay, I'm trying to avoid death, but cannot avoid it. So is there existence beyond it? We also asked, is there a notion of eternal happiness? Because again, they realized there's a lot of sorrow in life. Yes, there is happiness, but it is always punctuated by sorrow. So can one be eternally happy, or is it always in this yo-yoing situation of happy, sad, and so on? So in all this, then they asked, who am I? And when I say I, what does it mean? Because we all see that our body changes. At some time we were a small baby, and then we become sort of youthful, and then middle age, and then people become old, and so on. But we still say it's I. So what does this I actually mean? So the question is, who am I? Was a very, very important question. And obviously, that is related to existence beyond death and the body and so on. And then they said, hey, what is this relationship between me, or the I, and the ultimate, right? If there is such a notion of an ultimate. Not that Indra, Varuna, Agni are not the ultimate, they all have their own powers, but there is no notion of that one is better than the other. Yes, Indra is the king, but that doesn't mean he has more powers than Varuna or Agni or anything like that. So again, what is if there's an ultimate exists? What is the relationship between me, the universe, and the ultimate? So these were the kind of questions that were being asked at the end of the karma kanda, or the ritualistic part, or leading up to the jnana kanda. And the jnana kanda tries to address these sorts of questions. So the ultimate is called Brahman. So that is what this is. Again, we'll see how to define it, how to think about this ultimate. And they also realize this could be existence beyond death. That is, only the body dies, and this notion of Atman or I, which is persistent beyond death, is what is important. Then that led to the relationship between Brahman and Atman, and this is where the different interpretations come in. In Advaita, for example, the Atman and Brahman are identical. Vishishtadvaita, they are not exactly identical, and so on. and moksha is the only way to get eternal happiness. And so therefore they introduce this notion of, the samsara, this life, the cycle of birth and death, but then the moksha is the only way to get eternal happiness. So what we need to do is we need to unpack these ideas slowly. It will appear to be very, very repetitive as we go through the definitions again and again, but hopefully this very, very brief lecture sets the stage for what is to come. Thank you.